interesting thing about Deuteronomy is it starts with some pretty important concepts. So we've read 3 chapters today, and we're going to have to keep up with that at a regular pace in order to get through it. And so there's a couple things that are really important about Deuteronomy that I was thinking about sharing. It's nothing I haven't shared in the past, but it's something that I was going to talk about in Bible study. But I also want to keep this time open for any Q&A, questions, answers, things people want to discuss. It's really what I like to do in the evening. And that's something that I think that's important for us to do. But the important part of, I think, Deuteronomy and why we're supposed to read it again and again and again and again, and it is the most quoted book in all of the New Testament, and I think it's the most quoted book, if I remember right, of any other book by other authors of the Bible throughout the Bible. So even the prophets and such places it's quoted. And there's a reason for that. The word Deuteronomy literally means deutero, second, nomos, law. So have you ever heard someone say they're antinomian, right? Take the anti off, it's just nomian. Nomian means law, antinomian means no law. Deuteronomy means second law, second nomos, second Deuteronomy. So the reason why it's a second is it's like we took Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers and kind of put it in one book condensed so that we could read it regularly. And it seems as if people would more regularly read it. Well, the interesting thing that happens in the book of Deuteronomy is after Moses reminds the people of why he has to give the law a second time, that they failed the first time, they didn't go through the wilderness, so they had to get stuck in the wilderness for 40 years in their tents, which is what we're remembering, is why we're in tents. He then talks about church government. And so this morning, whenever we read, and not everybody was present for it, but hopefully you'll take some time to go back and look at that if it's not something on your mind. In verse 9, it said, I spake unto you at that time, saying, I am not able to bear you myself alone. This is Moses, the lawgiver, speaking. Yahweh your God has multiplied you, and behold, ye are this day as the stars of heaven for a multitude. So Israel had become a great people in that 40-year span. The Lord God of your fathers make you 1,000 times so many more as you are, and bless you as he has promised you. How can I myself bear your cumbrances and your burdens and your strife? Take you wise men of understanding, known among your tribes, and I will make them rulers over you. And ye answered me and said, the thing which thou hast spoken is good for us to do. So I took the chief of your tribes, wise men and known, and made them heads over you, captains over thousands, captains over hundreds, captains over 50s, captains over 10s, and officers among your tribes. The officers would have come from the Levites. The captains came from the tribal bishops or the pastors of the 10s, 50s, hundreds, thousands. And I charged your judges, and that's what they were. They were judges at that time, saying, hear the causes between your brethren, and judge righteously between every man and his brother, and the stranger that is with him. You shall not respect persons in judgment, but you shall hear the small as well as the great. You shall not be afraid of the face of man, for the judgment is God's. And the cause that is too hard for you, bring it unto me, and I will hear it. And I commanded you at that time all the things which you should do. And that was the very beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, and I thought that was important to remind everybody of, because it shows the absolute importance of church government before the conquest of Canaan. In other words, the very first thing, other than you have to keep the commandments of God, one of which has to be an organized people, is that is a super important part of any type of military action, right? And we as a church are supposed to be the church militant, right? We are taking ground, or at least we're supposed to be. And without any form of government or structure, you really have no way, no ability to do that. So just like God ordains structures in the home, and sometimes that fits into the church government. In the home, you have the father who is the head of the house, right? And that's taught in the law. It's taught in Numbers chapter 30. We've covered that in our Bible studies. It's also taught in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and you could kind of pick it out of all kinds of other scriptures, where, especially like in the fourth commandment, which is really important, the fourth commandment, you have the heads of the people being spoken to, because the commandment for the Sabbath goes out and says, thou or thy son, or thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, it's talking to the head of the home. And that is because his job is to remember the Sabbath for his home. So he is the man, he's the zakar, he's the head of the remembrance. So there is a structure in the home that's religious in nature. There's a structure in the home that is going to be in a warfare situation important because it's going to direct the battle in the right direction, right? But you notice that whenever Moses starts to preach and teach the people how to organize the tribes, he starts to speak to them about take you wise men known among your tribes and make them chief among you, right? Make them to be heads, which is what the word chief means. If you're reading it out of the Greek, you'll run across various words such as archos, which is where we get our word like arch for. Okay, it's talking about the top. And if you're looking at the Hebrew scriptures, you'll sometimes run across rosh, which is literally the word for the head on your shoulders. So you'll have various places where it talks about headship. And he's speaking and saying, if you don't have things organized, you'll never take ground. So I had to do this because I couldn't bear your cumbrances. So the first thing that you notice is the cumbrances, which means problems, that you're going to have among yourselves. You guys are not able to solve these problems, obviously, yourself. Moses can't do it alone. So you got to have a church structure. You got to have a government structure. The difference between what our ancestors believed, what I believe, from what the modern church believes, and most Christians today, is a matter of government. So everybody says they have an ecclesia, they have some kind of ecclesiastical government in their church. But how far that power goes, or how far that authority goes, or whatever you want to call it, power and authority technically are two different things. We'll discuss that in a minute. How far that goes is where you really decide whether or not the church is even active in the world or not, if it's even capable of taking ground. Okay? So Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law, right? In order to get the law to the people, there needed to be a proper government, not only to militarily act to take ground, to actually literally go to war, but then there was going to have to be instructions in the law of God that the judges were going to have to teach. And there was going to have to be some kind of an order in which to administer that. So one of the things that I think is important to realize that as we just read about conquests, that's all we read about pretty much in both chapter 2 and chapter 3 was different conquests that Israel was going to go up against. Giants that the first time they wouldn't fight. Remember, Israel didn't want to fight them. That's why they got turned back and were in the wilderness for 40 years, which is part of our remembrance in the Feast of Tabernacles, is living in booths for 40 years, living in tabernacles for 40 years. That their leaders are the ones who literally drew them astray. So if you go back and you read the other scriptures, there were 12 spies sent. They were all heads or bishops of their own people. They were captains of the army. They went up, you remember, they saw the giants. They said, we're like grasshoppers of these people. We're little bitty down here, and they're big, tall up here, and we can't take them over. Their walls are huge. They're giants. They're literally giants. They're big, and we can't do anything. And we're grasshoppers in their sight. So they immediately told their people, we can't do this. We can't fight this battle. There were two of them, Joshua and Caleb, and that's why they were reserved in our readings by God, two faithful men out of 12 that were willing to go forward and say, no, we will take these people. We trust in God. We can do it. And the people as a whole said no. So the majority ruled. Democratic rule. Democratic rule even among the elders that were ordained, even among the bishops that were ordained. The democratic rule caused Israel to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. So one of the first things that reinstituted is headship structure in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, what's interesting is you would imagine that the people that failed Yahweh and failed Israel, they were ordained properly. They were probably wise men. They were chosen to be good spies. They were good captains of their army. They weren't idiots, right? They weren't just randomly picked by lot or something. They had skill, like Joshua had skill, like Caleb had skill. But what was undone by the men who were selected was the faith of the people. And God judged the entire nation of Israel to wander for 40 years because of cowardice. Literally, cowardice. So here's the application that I think is really important for today's readings, because here's what we cover. Church government, God's law, church government. Church government's going to administer two things. Of course, we have a church and state that's united, or a church and nation that's united in Israel, and that's how it should be. But we have two things. We have warfare, taking ground, administration of law. Those are two things that you cannot have separated from each other. You cannot systematically or successfully put one foot above, past the other in marching and taking ground if you don't have church government. Okay? If you don't have any form of government, a military will do nothing. Right? I know today's military is kind of pathetic. We don't really know. I don't even know who's in charge, honestly. You watch stuff on news, you're just like, I don't know. I'm not sure who's calling the shots and doing stuff. I don't even know what's happening. But that's not what it's been in our history. And that's certainly not something that we are used to. So what I think is a good thing to discuss today as we look at this for the first day of the feast is, because remember, you tie this all together. Why do you keep the Feast of Tabernacles? To remember that Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. That's what we remember. What was the failure? It was a failure of church government. It was a failure of faith. It was faithlessness in the leadership. And so faithless leaders, faithless fathers, faithless elders in a church, in a nation, in God's chosen people will destroy the people. So one of the things I was thinking about talking about, if anybody has any questions, is this system that was imposed. And I don't know, I'm hoping that my markers show up better than last time. We got the board differently. We'll have to just see, and we'll have to see how that works. But I have some printouts that would probably be better, but they're not big enough for everybody to see. And I want to talk about what this actually would kind of look like, all right? So if you looked at the structure, there was captains of tens, captains of 50s, captains of hundreds, captains of thousands, right? So you have to look at it kind of like this. Let's look at the 1,000. As the highest head. So you have one man who is what we're going to call the head, right? And he is a judge. Okay? He's also what we call in English a bishop. Okay? These all mean the same thing. Okay? But he's not the only one. He's not a one-man show. Because there's multiple thousands in a nation. Nations of millions of people are going to have quite a few of him. And then there's this guy who's the prince, if you continue reading the book of Numbers. On top of this, in the New Testament, whenever we have this name here, which I'll break it down, I've done this in the several times. This word here is a Greek word that's been bastardized, and I'm not saying a bad word. Okay? Not being vulgar. It comes from the Greek word epi, which means over. Okay? Over. And it comes from another Greek word, which we still use in English today. We actually use epi too. And it's the word scope. Okay? Somehow, in the way that Anglo-Saxons butcher words, we took the word episcope and we turned it into Bischop. Sounds very German, doesn't it? Bischop. Bischop. Maybe we'll get some of our Germans. We got two people who kind of dabble in German in this congregation, so we'll get them to say it for us real guttural. But it's literally just, if you want to look at these words here, I'm not sure if you're able to see that. I hope you are. If I were to, for instance, add an E here and erase this part, what do you see? Episcope, right? Well, if I just change that into a SCH German sounds, you can see how we ended up from episcope to bishop. Okay? So when I use the word bishop, I'm not talking about a guy with a hat like this. You ever seen those guys who got big red hats? Like that, right? Got big red hats. We call them bishops, and they got a cross on their hat or something like that. Yeah, they shake the incense, and they got the thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an over, and what's a scope do? Come on, someone tell me. What do you do with a scope on your gun, huh?
See.
You see, okay?
Focus.
Over, see. I'm going to put an ER on it. Why, Emma? What's that make it? Huh?
He does the office.
What's that make them? What kind of word is that?
That's one that does it.
But what's that word? I took the word episcope, oversee, and turned it into a overseer.
Episcoper, yeah, when he does it.
One who does it, right? I was going to get some grammar out of you. Come on now.
I mean, I guess everyone do that.
Right. So he is active in something, right? He is now the overseer. He is overseeing. He's overseer. That's what his job is. So what is he doing according to the book of Deuteronomy? Huh? He is a head. He is a judge. Now, we meet with this word bishop in our King James Bible. A lot of new Bibles now translate that as overseer. They don't like that word. Here's another word, though, that's in your Bible that you're going to see in places, and we read it today. And that's the word pastor. Okay? Pastor. A pastor is from another old word we don't use. Somebody who pastures an animal. They literally are a shepherd. That's the literal meaning of the word, to pasture animals. So they're shepherds. They deal with sheep. Now, what's something that everybody, when they want to go to bed and they can't sleep, what do? What do they? They count sheep.
Count sheep.
There you go. So now you can see how an overseer is seeing sheep.
And pastor is just the Latin word for shepherd.
And pastor is just the Latin word for the shepherd, where we get our word pasture from. Correct? There we go. See, I knew you'd be good for this. So, overseers are overseeing sheep. Here's another interesting thing. In the book of Numbers, which we're not reading, but I have to tell you this because it's not implied. It is implied in Deuteronomy, because like I told you, Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law. It's a Deuteronomos. It's the condensed version. You read Numbers, the book of Numbers is the book of Old Testament church government, which is still New Testament church government because it doesn't change. It's just refocused in the book of Acts, Timothy, Titus. It's the same structure, just now being done and enacted on the scattered tribes. So when Timothy was talking to people, he was talking to people that he was organizing into a church. When Titus was in the Isle of Crete, Paul said, go into the cities, find, anybody know?
Overseer.
Nope.
Able man, just man.
Close. What does he say to look for first? Elders. Right? So this man, episcope, head, judge, pastor, and at our very top, he's going to be the guy of thousands. Now we're going to start moving downward on that. He's also got another thing going on here. He's an elder. Right. Elder. And he is a, what is this? What is 1,000? What is 1,000?
Number?
It's a number. Very good. What is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Under here, I'm going to have 100, 100, 100, 100, 100. There, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100. 10 times. Yeah. So, every one of these are captains of 100. So what do we got here? We've got a captain of 1,000 at the top of the list. He's a judge, he's a head, he's a pastor, he's an overseer, and he's overseeing numbers, he's an elder. So these are numbers. In the book of Numbers, this man's job, all through the book of Numbers, the episcope, that's from the Greek Septuagint, the LXX. I'm using Greek terms because the New Testament's in Greek. Right? This is how you would find it in the LXX. That's the Septuagint in shorthand. Stands for 70. This man is overseeing other elders. Those men are all of these things also, though. In other words, this man here is also, this guy here, he is also a head of 100. He is a judge of 100. He is a pastor of 100. He is an overseer of 100, because the job of all of these guys is to oversee the next below them in judgment, in pastoring and counting. And if you look at a military role, they have to be able to count their troops. Everybody remember the great sin of King David? What was one of the great hits? He numbered the people. You know why he got in trouble? He was the king. Do you know what he was not? He was not this guy. He was not this guy. And then under him, we have 50. And I'll not write it up for you again because then I'll be here writing ad nauseum. So I'm just going to go. That needs to get sick. Right on. Underneath every one of these, this guy, there is then 2 50s, and these guys here are also heads. These men, and then after that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 10s, 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 10s. See that? And that makes 50. This is the smallest number. David was not captain of 10 in such a way. He was the captain of the people of Israel. He was the prince of the whole nation. But he was not charged with the job of a bishop. He was not charged with the job of oversight. He was not charged with the job of the pastor. He was a pastor of the nation, but his job was distinct. So we get our ideas of church government in America too. Separation of church and state from this. It's your job to do federally. You're a federal officer. But the church, they have their job to do. Their job is number. But he says, but I'm the king and I'm going to wage war. And when I wage war, I need to know how many men I have under my control. Well, we know from the story what happened. What did Joab say? He said, far be it to do this wickedness. Wickedness? That's a lot. Just for counting people? Just for what do we call that now, huh? A census. Just for taking a census? Yeah. Why? Because this is ecclesiastical. Church, okay? Ecclesiastical. Ecclesia. Ecclesia. It's right here. In Greek, this means Greek. Very good, Dalton. Ek means out in Greek. Ecclesia, we still have a very common connection to this, right? Ecclesia means to call. To call. It comes from kalos. So it literally means outcall. The church is the outcall. Who's being called? That's what the job of the man in Deuteronomy was. Tens, captain of 50, captain of hundreds, and thousands. This man had to be wise in some capacity or another. Didn't have to be wise in the world, but he had to be wise. He had to be honest. He had to be a man of an honest report. He had to have certain qualities about him, capable of doing a job, and he had to obviously be able to perform works of judgment. Judgment. Now, there's something you need in order to do judgment. In the ecclesia, the outcalled of who? Who does the calling, Ed?
Christ.
Here you go. I'm writing downhill again. Sorry. The outcalled. Christ is doing the calling. We presume. Now, we have two concepts that you have to consider. Two concepts. There is the church, visible, eyeballs, and then there's the church, invisible. We've already got a chance to experience this, and anybody in ministry has experienced it time and time and time again. That's this. Christians that do Christian things aren't always Christians. They still join the church. They still become numbered with the people. Okay? They're still being counted in somehow, and I'll explain that in just a minute how that works. But they're not really Christ's. They're just numbered. So we have this thing called the church visible. That's what we do when we get together. We sing, we keep feasts. Not everybody does. We take communion together. You get baptized and all that. Now, the goal is that this is for the church invisible, the ones that God knows their heart, soul from the beginning, before the foundations of the world. Ephesians chapter 1, Christians, right? God knows who they are, and he knows who will be saved, because God, there's nothing is hidden from him, right? But the truth is not all men are sincere. Not all men have true faith. Some men have false faith, and some women have false faith. There were 12 spies. All those 12 spies, hold on one second. All those 12 spies were captains or heads militarily. I can't tell you if they were ecclesiastical entirely. I know Joshua was. But 10 of them were not Christ's. They didn't have faith. They didn't believe God could actually do what he said. They didn't believe his word. They didn't believe in what Moses said. They heard it. They kept the feasts. They did Christian things, right? They did God stuff. They knew the 10 Commandments probably. They probably recited the 10 Commandments. They kept the Day of Atonement. They sacrificed animals. The blood got sprinkled on them. They got baptized in the waters of the Old Testament washings. They were part of the people of Israel. They were even leaders in the church. And they led the people to fail. Joshua and Caleb, on the other hand, said, nope, we can do it. They were the faithful. And that's our example right there from the book of Deuteronomy. This is the system, and it's perfect because it's God's system. It's not everybody done perfect, but it's a perfect system. It's a perfect military system. Everyone. Everyone. Say, we have a look at the nut. Say, we have a look at the nut.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's kind of like.
Guys, you'll have to listen to the film, so hopefully anybody listening, we don't know why things do what they do. Good signal, good connection, still doesn't work. So, let's say, what else do we need to discuss here? Okay. Those who say they're the called out of Christ, right? So we have, I'm just going to write the viz. In the invis. This is going to be what we know as absolutely. We know when people show up and worship God with you, right? You know the guy standing beside you singing psalms. You know the guy taking communion with you. Look at Judas. Sat down with Christ, drank the wine, ate the bread, believed what Jesus told him. This is my body broken for you. Take, eat this. Heard all those words. And then afterwards, Jesus looks at him and he says, go and do what you're going to do and do it quickly. You're going to betray me. And it says he knew this because he knew he was a devil. So what was Judas? Visibly there, taking communion with the Lord. Invisibly, not a Christian. Invisibly, a devil. Right? Eventually, he manifested that through what? His works, his fruits.
The fruit test.
The fruit test. Yeah. Good trees bear good fruit. Bad trees bear bad fruit. Pretty straightforward. So let's talk about church government a little bit more before we close up on that. I'm going to erase this section that we're talking about here, but it will apply.
I'm just getting the stuff that helps.
No, we don't need it. So whenever we talk about these units of 10, right? You've got your units of 10. I'm going to put a little thing here, and we're going to start over. And we're going to look at this smallest 10 church government, right? We got a unit of 10. There is going to be obviously, or what's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What are these is the question. We have 10 people.
Would it be married men with children?
That's right. Titus tells us when he went out and he looked at the people that he was to take married men. Yeah, I do that. Here, let's go back up though. See, it's because I'm going like this. That's
Right.
the problem. See, it's either that or I do this. And then nobody can see me right. That's the problem. So we got married men. And they're not just married men, but they're married men with children, right? Now I'm going to make a point. What's the difference between child and children? Plural.
More than one.
Plural. There should be 2 children for a married man with a wife that he has had. This is where things get a little sticky. What about if these children do not turn out to be members of the church? What if these children are reprobate, like Eli? Eli had sons, but they weren't great. They were pretty wicked. But yet he was high priest, and he was certainly a bishop. He was a bishop of the Levites, the highest bishop of the Levites. He was the prince of the Levites. He was Aaron's son, Aaron's seed. And yet he held the office with 2 wicked sons. There's other examples. Samuel was the judge of the Lord, and the people said Samuel's children didn't walk as Samuel walked, and they didn't want them to judge them. Remember, the word judge. Samuel was also his number was, but they said, listen, we don't want your sons are wicked. And so then they got one of the kings in the federal realm that started to take more of the responsibility of the bishop away. So whenever I look at Titus, society, if I told you so-and-so is an elder, you'll either think he's my grandpa, which is inaccurate. I'm 44 and I'm a grandpa. I know grandpas that were in their 30s. So grandpa and age doesn't necessarily correspond, right? Can't be the answer to the question. 2 children and a married man make the biblical term elder active. That's what makes him an elder in one status. Now, this elder I have a capital E on. I'm going to make a differentiation, okay? I'm going to make this elder here with a little e. Even though I'm going to put capitals here so you can read it. Okay, I'm going to put a little e here. Just to make it different from this elder with an e. Because you're going to have 10 of these little e elders, I'll call it, in a church. The smallest church. The most normal church that will have what we call a synagogue. That's a Greek word, by the way. That's not Hebrew. Not Yiddish either. A synagogue literally means a gathering place. That's all it means. in Greek. And 10 families constructed of 10 married men technically will make one church in an area, in a city, in a county, in a region, in a valley, whatever you want to call it, wherever they exist, wherever they come together. In tribal Israel, it happened within the tribe, and it was tight and uniform, but you're never going to reconstruct that. And that's why the book of Acts and Timothy and Titus don't speak like the book of Numbers does, because you're not going to reconstruct that number. You can create it backwards once the people Christianize. You can start going backwards, but you're never going to go into a group of people who don't have government according to God's law and recreate it. Number one, some of them don't know, what tribe, how are we related? How's that work? How are you going to organize them? And that's the reason why government is different now in the New Testament than it was then. Not because in principle it's any different, but because you don't have the same tightness of headship to a tribe. So, you had the tribes of Israel: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. These are the tribes of Israel. I think that was all of them.
This Manasseh.
I probably just put him in with Joseph, but
Oh.
Manasseh's in there too. So you have all these tribes of Israel, and all of them have little branches coming down, and all of them get their heads. They get tribal headship. And that was how it was constructed in the book of Numbers. You can go read about it. This is why he said, go to your tribes, take ye wise men out of your tribes. They're taking these men here, and there's 10 of them, married men that have at least 2 children, and they are going to select one of them as the tithe. The word tithe in Old English just means a tenth. The 10th man. And they will select the guy who's got the wisdom, the judgment, knows God's law, and has the ability to lead, and has the ability to judge. They're going to select him, and he's going to become the pastor, the judge, the head, and the overseeing elder of 10. And then there will be another one here, and there will be another one here, and another one here, and then there will be 2 of those placed over top of that. And this is not for telling people what to do like we have in Roman Catholicism or in pure episcopacy. Okay, you ever heard of the denomination Episcopalians?
Yeah.
Episcopalians are episcopates alone. Okay? Presbyterians are the total opposite. They're ground up. They start with the congregation, with the people of the congregation, elect their elders, and they move their way upward. Episcopals don't. They move their way from the top to the bottom. So, biblically speaking, however, and I think if you go and read some of the works of guys like R.J. Rushdoony, who did a lot of this work, and I'm very grateful for some of the work he's done that implies a lot of what I'm talking about today, and I've learned it from. That's R.J. Rushdoony, a good guy to read. He made a very good observation looking at church government throughout history, and he said, it's not really one or the other, it's kind of both. He got in trouble because he was Presbyterian for saying that. And the one danger is that you take one side heavy and one side loose. So what I would say, and I would call it, is a presbyterial episcopate. Episcopate comes from our word episcope. That's where Episcopalian comes from, is our word episcope. Okay? Presbyterian comes from our word presbytery. Presbyteros, presbyteros, comes from the Greek word for elders. So these 10 men should make up a presbytery in a congregationalist system. Now you're going to notice a lot of what I'm talking about today are all denominations: Congregationalism, Episcopalianism, Presbyterianism, right? All of them are all 3 denominations. But what I'm telling you is all 3 of them are accurate. They just have to interact properly. And what we've done is, over history, this guy says, well, I'm going to focus on the congregational aspect. This guy says, I'm going to focus on the presbyterial aspect. And this guy says, I'm going to focus on the episcopal aspect, rather than combining them together and taking them, all those scriptures and putting them together to make God's law. And you know what? It's all found in the book of Numbers. If we just go back to the Old Testament, to the law of God, to the Torah, it'd be common sense. It would kind of come out. But no, people go, oh, I just want to focus on what the New Testament says. And that's what messes everything up, because the New Testament does not give enough information alone, because it was never intended to give you enough information alone. It was intended for you to read this word, bishop, episcope, and go, where did I find that in the law? The book of Numbers and Exodus and Deuteronomy. I've read that somewhere before in the Old Testament. And then you were supposed to go back and study the law. But when you have antinomianism in the church, because you have bad judges, bad pastors, who don't care a whole lot about the sheep other than getting the wool off of them, fattening them up and eating them, then you end up with people who just don't really care if the structure's right, if things are good, if things aren't good. They just want to do their job and go home. They don't want to actually help judge matters. And you know what? Quite frankly, the congregation doesn't want them to judge their matters anyway. If they have an issue with one another and they want to badmouth each other, lie to each other, or they want to steal from one another, we'll take it to the civil courts, to the heathen, if it's bad enough. But we don't want the church involved.
Thou shalt not judge.
Because the church is not a community structure anymore. It's not community. It's not communal. The church now is a business corporation. Almost all of them. And you can look that up. 501c3 tax-free organizations. There's a reason it's that way. And there's things they're not allowed to get involved with. Some of which are things that God says you need to be involved with. And if you get involved with them, you lose your tax-free status. Oh my. Sounds like we have a conflict of interest of numbering the people again, don't we? The government says, I want to number the people this way. The church says, God says to number it that way. Someone has to compromise. Historically, the church always said, you can cut my head off, but I'm standing my ground. We're not going anywhere. Now it's the other way around. Now they just say, well, will you pay me a little bit more? Will you give me a tax break? How about a grant? You give me a grant, give me some kind of benefit, and I'll buckle down and do what you tell me, Uncle Sam. Whatever you say.
Bootlickers.
Bootlegger. I thought you said bootlegger at first. I didn't realize bootlicker. So, how about age? I said that they have to be elders. What if you have this married man who has 2 children, but he got started young, and he's 14, or 15, or 16? You laugh now, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Just go look in Appalachian history. You won't laugh. All right? People were getting married a lot younger back in those days.
Yeah, if someone has twins in 1 year.
There you go. You could have twins. You could be 15 years old, just got married to your 15-year-old wife, and all of a sudden you're an elder. So that doesn't work. So there must be an age. Well, the Bible gives us one of those. If you look all throughout your Bible, and I'm not going to quote all the verses because they're easy to find. The Bible tells us that when God chose to slay the people who had a conscience that knew between good and evil, that's how he puts it. I didn't make it up. He said from 20 years old and upward, die. From 20 years and down, live. 20 years old is the biblical age of accountability. So these men here in the units of 10 have to be married men with children, at least two children, and they have to be 20 years old. Downhill again, sorry. So, what happens when you have 10 people together and they are coming together in church? One of these men who is older than 20 years old, who is married with children or has been married with 2 children, that's up for discussion. And then you select one of them, the tithe, the 10th man, and that tithe is made the pastor, judge, head, overseer, elder with a capital E. And why do I say that? Is it because I just want to make the guy prestigious? Well, actually, the scripture calls, and you can look it up in your King James Bible also, a ruling elder. That's what he's called, a ruling elder. So there's a rulership, and we don't like that. Here's how we keep all this balanced out, okay? Here's how you keep it all balanced out. This man's job is not to tell you how to put your socks on. He's not to tell you how to comb your hair. He doesn't tell you what beer you're allowed to drink. I'll go as far as to my Amish friends, which I really appreciate a lot about them. He's not to be telling you how wide your cabinet should be. I literally know a story of a bishop who actually told a guy he had to sell his house if he wanted to remain Amish because his cabinets were too wide. That's not what God intended. What God intended was men who could lead other men's families, lead the head. So when I preach, I'm preaching to my own family, obviously, who should be part of my own church. But I am preaching particularly to men, and especially men with children. And it's their job to go home and judge between what I've said, if it's true according to the Word of God, and if they agree with it, to teach it to their children. Now, their children are sitting here in church too. However, it's not my job. Now, I'll sit down with your kids and explain something if you want me to. But it's not my job to teach other men's children. Other men's children. It's not my job. It's not my job to take your wife aside and to teach her either. Matter of fact, I think that that's dangerous. And it should always be done in a family atmosphere to teach women and children with the husband involved. I think that that's the way it should be. And all you got to do is look throughout modern churchianity and you will see the reason why you should keep that going on. Pastors are particularly dealing with sheep, and the primary sheep is the ram of the family, the father. That's the whole purpose of church. Church is actually being particularly curtailed to him because I can't teach a child's message every single week or every Bible study. But if he listens, writes notes, thinks about it, agrees with it, knows his Bible, which is the most important part. You shouldn't listen to me if I can't show it to you out of Scripture. That's just hands down. If I tell you listen to me and it's not in the Bible, you shouldn't listen to me at all. That's called tyranny. That's what makes Episcopalianism different from Presbyterianism. The elders are allowed to judge the situations. But here is a difference that needs to be considered because this is something that we know all too well, unfortunately. There is a rulership that has to be understood in the church structure. In other words, the whole point of a court in a trial in modern society and in ancient society, when we're talking about this word here, judge, and we're admitting this guy, this pastor, he's a judge, is God's law. So God's law is the instrumental point in understanding whether someone's doing something right, wrong, indifferent, if they're leaving things done or undone, if they're doing what's right or they're doing what's wrong. That's God's law. That's the part, the Deuteronomos, the second giving of the law, the nomos, that's the point. Without the law, there's no judgment. I can't make a judgment without God's law. So if it's not a matter of God's law, I should just keep my mouth shut. Now I may make a recommendation and say, that's getting awful close to God. And I may hope that you would listen to that and take advice from it. Within a family, that's different. As a father, I may ask my children to do things that aren't directly out of the Bible. I'm allowed to do that because they're my kids. But I can't go around telling other men, you've got to do what I tell you to do because, well, I'm the pastor around here. And if not, I'll send you straight to hell. That's called Catholicism. So that's how they do it. Don't listen to me, we just send you to hell. Don't listen to the Pope, to hell you go. Just go look at how the Pope dealt with Martin Luther. You'll realize that real quick. Luther said you're doing things that aren't in the Bible. He says that doesn't matter. You go to hell. Heretic. Without God's law being the thing in which we discuss through judgment, this whole situation will become corrupt and it will become tyranny. That's how God's law keeps people in peace through justice. It's justice. What is just is what is right. What is right is what is just. Those are just synonyms. And justice only comes through God's law. That's all it comes by. It doesn't come through man's traditions. We may have traditions that we agree on by covenant. Covenants make things law. They become legal. So when I make an agreement and we make an agreement that we're going to do this, that, or the other thing, and we promise one another we're going to do them, Man has to keep his word. Numbers 30 says that. Whatsoever proceeds out of your mouth, that you must do. So when we make promises to one another, man to man, we got to keep them. Those promises are going to entail things that may not specifically be written in the Bible, but they're agreements between us. Okay? You want to sell me a pair of shoes? I don't got a law in the Bible that says how that transaction has to go, how I have to write up buying a pair of shoes. Me and you can make an agreement. And the old saying is that contract supersedes law. Why does contract supersede law? Because contracts are the fine points of how we are going to apply the law between us. So I don't need a law in the Bible that says I'm allowed to sell you blue shoes. I'm allowed to sell you blue shoes because I'm allowed to sell you shoes, right? But I might want to make a contract that says I sold you a pair of size 9 blue shoes made by such and such a brand or whatever, and here's the agreement. You're going to pay me this much for this long, and this is how this is going to work. And that's how we're going to make a contract. And then within that contract, within that covenant, we then establish justice. Those are the terms upon which if we steal from each other or we don't, or defraud one another, whatever. Okay? Lie. Because those are the finer points of the word. So with that being said, there are going to be what we call covenantal, and I'm going to end on this point because if not, I'm going to get too long. There are covenantal agreements, and so these people of 10, and here's where the fourth type of church government comes to play. There's another one I didn't tell you. I told you congregational, presbyterial, and episcopal. Thank you. I'm glad everyone's listening. Very good. Here's the fourth one, independent. Most Baptists consider themselves independent congregational. They drop the congregational about it and just say they're independent. There is scriptures that would lead us to say that there is a place for independent congregationalism. Here's how that is formed, though, and truthfully, Presbyterians have it too, Congregationalists have it too, Episcopals have it too, but we are going to get down to the nitty-gritty of the unit of 10, which we would love to see the unit of 10 turn into the unit of 50, turn into the unit of 100, and turn into the unit of 1,000. We would love to see that covenantally, but it's the covenant that is going to make one congregation independent from another congregation, even though they're united. Okay? But this judge here is going to have an awful hard time judging covenants of different people under him. So at some point, this thing has to grow. In other words, once you get enough people to form another church that's like you and of the same covenant of you, you would have to naturally split. That's not a bad thing. You're growing. And you're forming a new church. And you're going to take dominion.
Synod? Like a synod.
A synod is eventually, you would eventually get to a synod, yeah. But we don't even have to use the term synod. That's Presbyterian language mainly. But here's what I want to make my last point on. The independent aspect of the Congregationalist Presbyterian Episcopal Church is the covenant. I make a covenant with you that we are going to sing psalms, and you make a covenant with me. We're not going to sing hymns. We're going to sing psalms. I make a covenant with you. We're going to keep biblical feasts because it's according to God's law. You make a covenant with me. We're going to keep biblical feasts. We're going to make a covenant together. We're going to worship together as the same people in the same way. We're going to baptize as adults. We're not going to baptize as children. I'm giving you aspects of the covenant. We're going to take Lord's Supper only on Passover once a year because that's what the Bible shows us. We make these decisions and we covenant them. That doesn't mean we hate the guy over here who doesn't do what we do. It means he's part of a different covenant. We can work together, but we're not going to agree. And if you try to press us together too tightly while we disagree, we're going to have conflict and friction, and it's going to cause trouble. So people have to stay inside of the bounds of their covenant or come up with ways they can covenantally compromise. That means lawfully compromise. In other words, it doesn't break God's law. I don't agree personally, but I will forfeit what I think is the true reading of Scripture so that we can get along. That's going to happen occasionally. It has to happen. If it doesn't, you'll get nowhere. You'll be all alone by yourself doing nothing, thinking you're the only person that's right in the whole world. And I've met a ton of them people. I've also met a ton of people that are part of huge, giant organizations and have no idea what they believe. They don't even know why they're part of that organization, other than their mother and their father and their father, grandparents and great-grandparents were all part of that organization. they've never read the covenant or the catechism or whatever they're using as a covenant. So I'm giving you these examples. And we've basically gone over church government in a nutshell. This is the first time I've done a video on this, so I'm hoping it came out somewhat clear. I think we did lose some of the visuals. I'm really sorry about that. I wish that wouldn't have happened.